Hi, Stacy. We're super thrilled to be talking to you today. And I wanted to ask the first question because I read your biography and I was a bit like, holy smokes, that's impressive. And I loved your first sentence because it describes you as the foremost disruptor of inequality in the entertainment industry. And I just love that framing. So maybe you can tell us a little bit what you mean by that. Are you always the uncomfortable person in the room?
Well, I think I make a lot of people uncomfortable. A lot of people are uneasy, uh, and it happens almost on a weekly basis. So you get used to it, being unpopular. But it's great to be here, and I'm not actually sure that I wrote that sentence. So maybe that's others' perceptions of me. But I think what we try to do is use data and theory to shed light on problems and come up with compelling solutions for change. And sometimes that has a tendency to make people feel a little uneasy.
No, but could you expand a little bit more? How do you come into that situation to be so deeply concerned with all facets of inequality within the industry?
Well, I think that's a great question. We started working on this question back in 2003. All the research coming out of the Gina Davis Institute is really my intellectual property, and up through 2014. And when we first started, it was really about thinking what's going on in, she was uniquely interested in children's television. I was uniquely interested in film and really kept on the film path because television has been far more equitable than film has been. And, we started with a simple question about gender and race. And when you see the results come in and they're so problematic, you have to immediately start thinking about solutions. And so at that point in time, I wrote a list of almost 20 studies that I'd like to do. We finally have finished off that list and many more. But with all of those questions came solutions like the inclusion writer or the 4% challenge or working, on the issue of inequality with critics, and their reviews of film and who gets to participate in that process or writing the Amazon policy. So there have been so many different opportunities and the goal is to really shed light on, we do amazing research. I mean, there's 300 students we work with a year, lots of different sponsors, lots of different teams. And these solutions are not in isolation. Work with many people across rolling them out. But the North Star is really, what does research and theory tell us about the problem and the solution? And often it's disruptive because people don't like the prescriptive nature of solutions, right? But if somebody's sick, you go to the doctor and you get a prescription, right, to take care of it. We have to do this with inequality. And sadly, the entertainment industry has never approached the top scholars in the world to solve this problem, which is one of the reasons why they're in the problem that they're in, right? They rely on themselves to self-regulate, and the data are really clear. They can't do that. So the best of the best, and there's lots of folks around the country and around the world need to be brought in to answer this question. And we've been really fortunate to play a role as one voice towards marching towards a solution.
Absolutely. I mean, you've already touched upon a few points, like a couple of initiatives that you started, and then also the issue of data and the issue of missing data. And I think that we wanted to talk to you because we actually experienced you talk at the Gotham's Week in New York, and you talked about one specific initiative, the inclusion list. So
Yes.
maybe you can tell us a little bit what the initiative is, the inclusion list, and how it all started.
Sure. So Adobe came to us and wanted us to do something really big that would have an impact. And this was during the pandemic. And a real concern about, I mean, we saw a lot of accelerated, people writing checks and public statements, during the pandemic. First people were laying people off, and then George Floyd's murder happened. And then the companies re-engaged. But then there's always a waning, right? There's a lot of public commitment, and then things start to regress. And so Adobe wanted to do something that would be really significant. And there's been a few moments over time with our data that we found something really, really interesting, in that it's really part of the solution. And it ended up playing a central role with this inclusion list. But let me not get ahead of myself. Adobe wanted to do something positive. So we said, okay. And so I had this idea. What if we rank the filmmakers, the films, the companies, and say who is doing the absolute best job on inclusion? Who actually is setting a bar or setting a norm for their peers? Because if we could demonstrate that people are doing it and doing it well, this can foster folks saying, A, it can be done, B, competitiveness to want to be on the list, and C, highlighting folks that maybe wouldn't typically get highlighted. So what was really fascinating is that, we came up with this list that was all data driven. Who's on screen according to a series of on-screen inclusion criteria, and who's working behind the camera according to a behind the camera criteria. Criteria is one of the most important ways to solve the inclusion problem, because as soon as you have a standard and you hold everybody to the same standard, then talent can rise based on their ability and based on their contribution, not based on how people see them or their identity. And so that's what we did. And what was incredible, actually, was what we found. We found, and not to get too much into the results in ahead of your questions, but we found that the people punching at the highest level for inclusion were people like Gina Prince Bythewood and The Woman King, right? The movie Zola, The Farewell, and what all of these films at the very top, I think the top 10, but the top 3 in particular had in common, they were helmed by women of color. And that is one of the most important solutions for creating change. Women of color are more likely to hire and crew folks that look like the world we live in than other identity groups, and meaning white males, white females, etc. And so this list was really incredible, because you have these great films that, if we think about The Farewell, if we think about The Woman King, they're received powerfully by audiences and highly inclusive. So it really illuminated this can be done, and it can be done well. And so that was one of the major highlights that we were able to roll out. There were a few other fun surprises, but we weren't shocked by those findings, but we were really excited that that's how the data fell, because these are phenomenal filmmakers. And despite punching usually at the highest level, women of color as directors, women of color film critics, women of color actors, they often get the fewest resources. So this was a really important finding coming out of the list that we could publicize in Cannes when we took the list internationally.
Now, it is very interesting that you would find positivity to be something that needs to be promoted, because when we talk about news values, it's always negativity that sells, that will bind attention. So I think this kind of the switch must have been, was it easy for you at that specific moment to say, let's do this? Because before that, I mean, it's a lot of frustration through the years to pinpoint to problems and probably don't see enough change. So so maybe this is a twofold question. What was the essential point for that switch towards positivity? And then what kind of effects would you see with that kind? Because we were enthused. So what were the effects after Cannes?
Well, I think it's really important. I'm an educator. I believe in a growth mindset. I want everyone to get an A, right? You go in expecting the best out of people. And Hollywood is the most amazing place because they never disappoint. They're always doing it wrong, right? Like as someone who likes to predict and control and explain, because those are the hallmarks of science. Hollywood doesn't disappoint, right? They don't do well every single year. But and that's important because you're right. If it bleeds, it leads. Negative sells far more than positive, right? I mean, we all know this intuitively, but the research is consistent with that. And so what I think it really so for us, it was important to tell a positive story because we're not highlighting on the fact that it can be done, right? Like, look at our top producers, people like James Lopez, right? Will Packer, Kevin Feige, Dee Dee Gardner, Jeremy Kleiner. These are people that are routinely, not once, it's not a one and done. They had to do, have a commitment to thinking about, talent, not by identity, but by how notable their skills are on screen and behind the camera. All of those folks as producers are hitting it out of the park. We wanted to be able to recognize folks and say, look, you could have quality and you can have inclusion. You can do this one time, but more importantly, you can make this a consistent part of your hiring process. And being able to highlight that becomes really important in this backdrop. In Hollywood right now, if you release a study, you're not going to get much attention in the press, which is fine because we don't do it for press attention. We do it to hold the industry accountable. We know who reads the reports. We know who doesn't look at the reports. But right now, there are so many reports. People are desensitized to this information. And so I think it becomes important to show people targets of opportunity. Look, these are the people that are doing it really well. It can be done. You're constantly trying to remove excuses. People are like, it can't work. You can't hire below the line inclusively. No, you actually can. And here are the films and here are the producers that do it. And we're about to release another list. I don't know if you have been tipped off to this right before the Emmys on episodic content, which hopefully this isn't confidential because if it is, I just gave it away. But that's right around the corner. And then we're going to do the film study again because the goal is let's keep shining a light on who's getting it right. Study their processes, help us understand how they get stories made at all different price points, and so that people have a model that they can replicate. Because for some reason, humans have a really hard time just appreciating talent. They're too blinders, their own group. And Hollywood is really, the lowest of the low when it comes to a lack of inclusivity. So, well, them and Wall Street, basically. So we think that this message is important. And because there's so much study fatigue, making a list and having people compete, which studio is going to be on the list? Think about Netflix. They're way ahead of just about everybody else. And people can criticize them all they want, but they are led by girls and women, and they're led by underrepresented racial ethnic groups in a way that none of the other groups are. That's really exciting. So if we can show people how that's being done by people like Bella Baharia or Scott Stuber who run content at Netflix, then the other folks in the space, they don't have an excuse. And maybe then they have a model to follow so that they can get the credits of being on the list.
There's kind of never a list fatigue, I would say. It's hard to imagine.
Oh, no. Right. The power women list, the agent list, the lawyer list. It's ridiculous, right? Like a star and a trophy for everything, right? That's what we're in. But for us, it wasn't really about that. It was more people need a blueprint to do this, and they don't seem to have it. But gosh, James Lopez knows how to do it. So how can we help share James's story, right? He's somebody that's cared about this forever. And Gina Prince Bythewood, look at her decisions. She's cared about this forever. But how do we help put a light on these folks that are very talented and care deeply about humanity?
And do you feel like enough people know of the list already? Or how do you go about it, about spreading the word about the project, the initiative, the inclusion list? How do you get the word out?
Well, we did get quite a bit of visibility when we put out the first one, which was great. And then we talked about it at Cannes with Eva Longoria, which was amazing. And so, I think part of our job is to make the information as easily accessible as possible. So we're moving all of our data onto online platforms so that people can see really quickly, check the data, because we want to be able to ultimately have a database where people type in Steven Spielberg and see every single hiring decision he has made on the content that his name is on. Because that's what that's what Gen Z wants. They make decisions based on the values that people are companies prescribe. So, or ascribe to. So for us, what kind of press happens is just what happens. Sometimes there's happy accidents and it goes viral, like, Frances McDormand saying inclusion writer at the Oscars, or Brie Larson talking about our data with film critics when she received an award. That's amazing. But the work of it is, if you're sitting at the top of one of these companies and your producer is on that list, guess what? Your whole company is going to find out who is at the top. And so this is a real inside outside approach to helping people understand and then anticipate and know that this is something that they can achieve if they hire inclusively.
One more thing, because you talked about many artists, famous artists, also promoting and amplifying the message. And you made it seem like this was pure coincidence. It's not. Of course, you're searching for collaborations there, for coming together, no, and creating dots and knots. Or was it mostly really what you said, like like great coincidences? Or is it? I think it's integral part of the work, isn't it, of amplifying, or how we do it?
It's really important to have folks. We know that one of the greatest ways to achieve gain is to have what's called cognitive diversity. People from very different backgrounds coming together, different viewpoints. It could correlate with identity. It doesn't always have to, but you want people from different perspectives to come together. You want a lot of what's called weak ties. You want a lot of people that are connected to other people, not that they're their closest friends, but that the information and the connectivity can diffuse across a lot of different groups, a lot of different industries, from soccer moms to CEOs, right? You want everything. Big cities out to rural areas. You want to make sure that kids in Kansas and Alabama are seeing information that, we're measuring trans representation, and there's a team that cares about them and cares about their visibility. And so the piece of who we do this with, I have been very fortunate to have friends in the entertainment industry that have been cultivated in a variety of different ways, but always through the work. They're looking for connections to the work. Even I have worked on many, multiple studies on Hispanic Latino representation, right? Brie and I and Tessa Thompson have worked on creating change in the industry with film critics, right? I've got a new project that's coming up with Cate Blanchett. And so there's just a lot of things that Cate Blanchett and her producing partner, Coco Francini, which is because of Cannes, being at Cannes with the inclusion lens. So there are a lot of ways that we think critically about how do we reach different constituencies with different data points. We've talked with Jay Shetty now multiple times and thinking through how do we work critically with Jay, because he has a very different audience. And so some of it's coincidence, because many of the folks I just mentioned are very busy people, right? But it's also Gen Z. It's also people that follow us that a message resonates with, and then they amplify it, and then they reach out, or vice versa, and there's connectivity. And so you can't plan that, right? Like none of those things, do you sit down and go, okay, so we're going to have Frances at the Oscars say, no, I knew her agent, and the agent mentioned something in passing that I had worked on with, Fanchon Cox and Kalpana Kodagal on the inclusion writer. So some of them are purely coincidental, And then others, like the work that we did with Riz Ahmed, you know, there's a, how do you bring people together that have unique strengths that are very, very different? And I mean, that's what storytelling is, right? You bring a whole bunch of people with a lot of different skills together to tell a small or big story, and you hope it lands across a whole bunch of different people. So we spend some time thinking about it. Most of our time, though, is thinking about two things: the reliability and validity of our work. That is our audience. My audience is academics, but I write for consumers, and then what are the solutions for change? Because everybody pegs us as researchers, but it's really the solutions that we've been a part of that are the most important thing that we've probably done. So I hope that answers your question, but we're always looking for partners. If your film festival might want to partner on something, I can come in and be very critical of folks, and you folks could look very kind and nice. I mean, this is the role we often play, but it's literally from conversations like this, you see if there's connectivity and excitement. And if there is, you know, you go on a second or third date and see if, you know, there might be something that, you know, you can put together as a project that will be meaningful to people that read it or see it or respond to it.
So I'd say that's a commitment to joining us next year at FilmFest Munich in the summer. And I mean, you just touched. Yeah, perfect.
I love
I
Munich.
mean,
I've been there. I absolutely love it. I can be less of a tourist. I can drink some nice, strong coffee and talk about film because I don't know much about like the artistic part, but it sure would be fun. Yeah.
so I'd say it's a deal. And I mean, we could chat forever, but thank you so much, Stacy, for taking the time. And this is basically what our conference is all about: connectivity, new ties, bonding, and talking about very, very important issues that should be dear to all of us. Thank you so much, Stacy.
Thank you.
You.